kindergarten through university, every room would have half standing desks and half sitting desks. And so if somebody needed to stand, they learned best that way, they could use a standing desk. And some people don't want to stand all the time, but they want to stand part of the time. And so that's how the room would be orchestrated. So we're going to talk about how the brain learns best tonight in several areas. First of all, multi-associations, mirror neurons, reading aloud, sleep, and then we're going to talk about some gender differences. IQ level, sensory preference, and gender and how each brain listens differently. So if we can cram that in to the next 40 minutes, and then we'll take a short break, and then we'll talk about some other things with the brain. So first, the brain learns best when it gets multi-associations, meaning you give it the whole package, even though you may go back and emphasize some other pieces. But unfortunately, many teachers and schools do what we call sequential learning. They say, okay, we're going to learn this, so now we're going to do step 1, and next week we'll do step 2, and next week we'll do step 3. And the brain needs the whole picture, even though you go back and reinforce it. You know, when kids are at home, when they're little, there's no sequential learning. You know, they're listening to different people talk, they're seeing the big picture of shopping, and unfortunately, we don't teach that way in many schools. So it needs the whole thing. It's not enough to just have somebody talk to you or read. It needs hands-on learning. It needs stories about learning. And that's the way the brain learns best. Secondly, it learns by watching. When I talk to parents, they'll often say, well, I'm telling my kids what to do. If the parents are not doing what they're telling the kids to do, what is it the brain is going to learn? Which one? What the parent says or what the parent does? What the parent does. So I tell parents, if you want your kids to learn something, you have to be doing it. Because telling the kids to do something and you're not doing it, they're going to follow what they see you do, not what they hear you say. And that's because we've got mirror neurons in the brain, and they're right here behind your forehead. Amazing cells. When they watch somebody doing a behavior, they actually start firing. They start exchanging messages as if they were actually doing what they're seeing. So not only is it important for parents and teachers to be doing what they want their students or their children to do, but it's pretty important what else they watch. So these mirror neurons don't make any judgment about, well, this is good, this is not so good, this is desirable, this is undesirable. They just watch and mimic. If you want to learn a skill quickly, then find somebody who's good at doing what you want to learn and watch them do it. Your brain will start firing as if it's actually doing it, and then it will just move the behavior to your own motor neurons, and you'll start doing it. Especially with things like playing music. If you watch somebody playing the type of instrument that you want to learn, it will help jumpstart your learning. It's amazing. So it's more than just learning educationally. What researchers find is that within 3 years, you tend to mimic the behavior of the people with whom you hang out. So it's really important to choose carefully who you hang out with, because gradually you will start picking up those behaviors. This is especially true for education. If you value education and you want to be educated, then you better hang out with people who value that. If you hang out with people who think education isn't worth anything, within 3 years, you're likely to have dropped out of school. Smoking cessation is huge, and smoking is really bad for your brain, because every time you take a puff of cigarette smoke or cigar smoke, you don't get as much oxygen to your brain. That smoke has taken up some of that space. So if you want a good brain to last a long time, never start smoking if you don't smoke. And if you smoke, quit. It's one of the best things you can do for your brain. But again, it's the people you hang out with. So if you hang out with people who smoke, within 3 years, you're highly likely to start smoking. If you want to stop smoking or never start, hang out with people who don't have that particular habit. Overweight and obesity is huge. If you hang out with people who are very, very overweight, within 3 years you're going to be packing the pounds on. It's just so fascinating. Happiness. You want to be happy, you need to hang out with people who are happy. Because happiness is catching. Like yawning and laughter. It's catching. So you want to hang out with people who are happy if you want to be happy. And this is huge. Bullying behaviors are learned. The brain doesn't do bullying behaviors and criticizing and yelling and hitting and it doesn't do those behaviors without learning those behaviors. So if you hang out with people who are exhibiting these behaviors, then within 3 years you're at high risk for exhibiting those yourself. Lots of studies with children who are just 4 to 6 years of age. One of them was called the Marshmallow Study, done at Stanford University. And after they watched these kids and followed them, it's a longitudinal study, followed them until they're all grown, they're pretty clear that any child who exhibits bullying behaviors learned that from somebody. They learned it by watching people in their family or by hanging out with other kids who exhibited bullying behaviors. So it is critical who you hang out with. When you're trying to learn a skill and you are practicing that skill, you can speed your learning by rehearsing in your mind's eye. So here was one study that shows how that works. They took individuals who were learning to play the piano and they asked them to practice a specific piece of music for 2 hours a day for 7 days. So they did a brain scan on them before this 7-day period, and they did a brain scan on them at the end of the 7-day period, and the brain had actually changed its motor cortex from 14 hours of practice. Now here's what blew the researchers away. They took piano students and they said, we don't want you to actually play the piano for a whole week. Do not want you to touch the piano. But what we do want you to do is take this piece of music and set it up somewhere where you can look at it. And for 2 hours a day, for 7 days, we want you to imagine in your mind's eye that you are actually playing the piano. Picture yourself doing that. Did the same thing with them. Brain scan before that 1 week period and brain scan 7 days later. And the people who had practiced in their brain had the same reshaping of the brain's motor cortex as the ones who had actually physically played the piano. Do you get that? So the way to really learn is, yes, to do some actual practicing, but then when you aren't around the piano, do it in your brain. And you will double the speed of your learning. Absolutely amazing. And who knew? Now, in the late 1800s, when I was a child, I wanted to play the harp. And I said to my dad, I want to learn to play the harp. I think it's just a gloriously sounding instrument. And he goes, well, that's not going to happen. He said, number one, they're very expensive. You know, we can't afford a harp. And number two, they're big. You know, a great harp is like 7 feet tall. I don't know how much it weighs. He said, I'd have to buy a pickup truck to haul the harp around. It's not going to happen. Oh, I said, that's too bad, because I'd really like to play a harp. Well, several months later, I came downstairs to breakfast, and my father said, you might want to go and look in the living room. There's something there for you. And I thought, oh, he's bought me a harp after all. So I go running to the living room. There is no harp there. What there was an instrument called a vibraharp. Do you know what a vibraharp is? Well, you know what a marimba is? Picture a marimba. It's got wooden keys. A vibraharp has metal keys, and you play it with mallets. You know, and the vibraharp has little beating rotators at the top of each pipe. So instead of having to hit it repetitively like you do on a marimba, you hit it once, and these beaters carry the sound on. And so it sounds a little bit like a harp. The problem is you play it with mallets. You play a harp with your fingers. So he hands me 4 mallets and says, here's the instruction book and here's your mallets, start practicing. So the first thing I had to do was read the instructions and figure out how I'm going to hold this mallet. You hold one mallet with these 2 fingers, and you sort of, it's flexible against the palm of your hand, and so you hit the mallet and it sort of has this elastic bounce. Okay, that's great with 2 mallets, 1 in each hand, but you can't play many notes with 1 in each hand. So you got to put 2 mallets in each hand. Now that's a trick. And you have to learn how to hold them. Put 1 finger in the middle of the 2 of them, and then you can move them back and forth so you can hit 2 notes close together or 2 notes far apart. Well, it was a bit of a challenge. And after I'd been practicing the vibraharp for like 10 days, my father says to me, okay, next week I'm giving a seminar at such and such a place, and it all folds up and comes apart. And he says, I'm going to take the vibraharp and I want you to play a piece at my lecture. And I'm going, is he nuts? I've had this thing for 10 days. I can barely hold 2 mallets in my hand. I mean, the first few days it was hysterical. I got these 2 mallets, and one would fly off in the air somewhere, and then another one would fly off in the air, and I'd run around and retrieve them and put them back in my hands and try to play. And I'm going, this is going to be a disaster. Here I'm going to be playing in front of all these people after 2 weeks, and I'm going to lose a mallet, and it's going to be awful. And I said to him, I can't do that. Well, he says, I've already put you in the announcement. He said, that'll be something to strive for. I don't know how he knew about practicing in your mind, because I'd never heard about it. And he was driving me to school one day. I must have been about 13. And I was whining. You know what whining is? It's anger, squeezing out through a very small opening. Because I was angry that he wanted me to play that in public this soon. He said, look, Arlene, this is what you do. He said, you practice in your brain. You can practice in your mind when I drive you to school and drive you back home. And I go, how do I do that? Well, he says, close your eyes. Now, picture standing by the vibraharp. Can you see the instrument? And I said, yeah, actually I can. Good, he says. Now, can you see the mallets? And I said, yes, I can see the mallets. He says, all right, pick them up, put them in your hands. Now, pick a song that you've been practicing. And I said, okay, I got a song. He said, now all you have to do is see yourself in your mind's eye practicing that song. So, you got your mallets ready. What's the first chord? Hit it. So you got your foot on the pedal so that you can dampen it when you're done with that. You want to change to another chord. So all the way to school, he's coaching me to practice the vibraharp in my mind. I thought he was nuts. But it worked. I could eventually, after a few days' trips back and forth to school, I could hit a wrong note, hear myself hit the wrong note, correct it, and hit the right note. 10 days later, I played a song for him at one of his lectures. I don't think it's probably the best job I ever did, but I actually played it. And for the rest of my life, I have primarily practiced the vibraharp in my mind, because I'm busy. I don't have a lot of time to sit there or stand there. So I will play the song several times at home till I learn it. And then from then on, it's practicing in my mind. And it works. You just have to choose to do it. Sometimes it's a little difficult to get that first clear picture. I'm standing here with my eyes closed, but I can clearly see the vibraharp in front of me. I can reach out and pick up the mallets. I can get my foot on the pedal, and then I'm off and running. So what is it you need to do that you can practice in your brain, because you can practice anything in your brain? Reading aloud is the fastest way to learn information, material. And that's because research has shown that when you read silently to yourself, you use parts of all of your brain, but you don't, it's not very stimulating. So picture my face as a clock. Put 12 on my forehead, 6 on my chin, and then 3 and 9 at each ear. Now draw an imaginary line from 12 to 6 and from between 3 and 9. You have 4 chunks of cerebral tissue, and that's real. That's not theoretical, that's real anatomy. So they put somebody in a PET scan camera, positron emission tomography, and asked them to read a paragraph to themselves silently. They wanted to see where in the brain the cells that let you read start working. And the reason they can do that is because they inject some radioactive glucose into your vein. And as the cells start working, they call for glucose because that's the fuel. That's what the brain, that's the only way the brain neurons can work. They get some fuel. And they watch on this printout where in the brain the cells start working that let you read silently to yourself. And what they discovered was little pinpoint of light showed up. That's what happens with the radioactive glucose. It shows what cells are working. So there's a little teeny group of cells in each of those 4 chunks that have to work together to let you read silently. Now this wasn't part of the experiment, but one of the researchers said, I wonder if anything would change in the brain if we had them read out loud. I said, I don't know, let's ask them. So they said, all right, read that same paragraph, but this time read it out loud. And what do you suppose happened? 80% of those chunks of tissue lit up, just like, you know, a firecracker display in the sky. It is a very, very complex mental function to read out loud, much more so than reading silently to yourself. And when you read out loud, you not only get the sense from the words, but you reinforce your speaking ability, you increase your level of retention and recall because you're seeing it, you're saying it, you're hearing yourself doing it. And it's much easier for that to move into long-term memories. So if you're studying a subject, especially one that's challenging for you, read your assignments out loud, and it will make a difference. Reading out loud for only 10 minutes a day is now an anti-aging strategy because it's so stimulating for the brain. So I was telling this to a group of senior citizens. None of us present, of course, are senior citizens. And I said, read out loud 10 minutes a day. And a lady said to me, Dr. Taylor, I live alone. And I didn't understand why she was saying that to me. And I nodded and smiled and went on, and she said, "No, I'm telling you, I live alone." And so I stopped and I said, "What do you want me to understand about you living alone?" "Well," she said, "you just told me to read out loud for 10 minutes a day, and I'm telling you I live alone." I said, "I didn't say anything about reading to somebody else in your house. I just said read aloud." "Oh," she said, "I couldn't do that. I'd be so embarrassed reading out loud at home." I said, "I thought you said you lived alone." "Who's there that you want to be embarrassed about? Embarrassment's a choice. Don't go there." "Well," she said, I'm sure I need to read to somebody." I said, "Do you have any pets?" "Yeah," she said, "I have a cat." I said, "Good. Take the cat, put it on a chair, read out loud to the cat." "Well," she said, "I don't think it would understand what I'm saying." I said, "It doesn't matter. If you need to read to somebody, read to the cat. Just read in a very pleasant voice, and it'll probably love hearing the sound of your voice." I don't know if she's doing it, but I hope so, because it is an anti-aging strategy. You need enough sleep, and this is where a lot of people damage their brains. Every brain has an optimum level of sleep that it needs in order to function properly. You have to figure that out for yourself. Didn't take me long to realize that I need 9 hours every night. And for part of my life, I thought, well, you know, I'll just stay up an hour later and get 8 hours sleep, and I'll get by. Well, you might get by, but it won't be good for your brain, and you will not be as productive during the hours that you're awake. And it took me for a while to really believe that. But now I can tell you, if I have 9 hours sleep, I go like a house of fire all the rest of the hours in that 24-hour cycle. And I get more done than if I cut my sleep by 1 hour. You see, you think you're more productive, but you really aren't. So if I only got 8 hours sleep and I need to do a seminar like tonight, I'll know the difference. That 1 hour will make a difference in what my mind does and how fluid my speech is and what I remember that I want to say. And if I only get 7 hours sleep, and you've ever heard me lecture before, you'll know it. So you're in luck. I got 7 hours last night, plus 2 more. I got my whole 9 hours, and it makes a huge difference. In fact, when you're talking about length of life, there's a real definite link between whether or not you're sleep deprived and how long you live. Now, the problem with teenagers and college-age kids is they need whatever they need for their brains, and it's usually 7, 8, or 9 hours, and sometimes it's 10. It's the rare person that gets by without 7 and really does a good job. But your brain is being rewired in your teenage years. From puberty to about age 19 or 20, it's actually rewiring itself. And the pathways in the brain are changing. And after puberty, you can do brain scans on male and female brains, and they're wired entirely differently. During this rewiring process, the brain gets off-center with the other adults for several years, meaning the brain is about 2 to 3 hours behind the average adult, which means adults in your family are going to bed at 10. Teenagers don't want to go to bed at 10. They're not ready to go to bed till 12 or 1 a.m. By the same token, they are not ready to get up in the morning when you get up in the morning. And our schools have done these kids a huge disservice because many classes start at 7 a.m. Okay, the kid went to bed at 1 a.m. because that's what happens to the brain while it's being rewired, but it's not ready to learn then till 9 or 10 or maybe even 11. And it's unfortunate because these kids would be better off if school started at 10 or 11 in the morning and then went to 4 or 5 at night in the afternoon. And that's not what happens. So kids have to try to make themselves go to sleep so they can have enough sleep by the time they're forced to wake up in the morning, and it's an unnatural sleep pattern, and it's unfortunate. So there is also a link between sleep deprivation and obesity. And obesity is horrible for the brain, for anybody, but it is lethal for the female brain. Females who are obese their whole life have something like an 85% increased risk of dementia. So here's one study. Individuals who get insufficient sleep tend to eat an extra 300 calories the following day. And it's often ice cream. So men and women will eat an additional 300 calories, but for women, it's usually ice cream. That's their calorie of choice. And so therefore it's very, very easy for women to gain weight, and then it's very, very difficult for them to lose it. So here's another piece of research. 20 hours without sleep, and your brain is functioning the way a brain who has already reached the legal limit of alcohol intoxication. And in the state of California, it's 0.08%. And it's functioning just like a brain that's already reached that legal limit. Here's the fascinating thing. As people become tired, they often think they're doing better. They have no idea that they're not doing very well. And they'll lose sleep, but they'll think, I'm doing just fine. No, they're not doing just fine. They're having all kinds of problems, but the brain is so tired it doesn't even recognize that level of functioning. So your prefrontal cortex, right here behind your forehead, which takes till mid or late 20s to be completely done. It's always active when you're awake, but it regenerates itself while you sleep. And the brain repairs itself at different parts of the brain at different times in the sleep cycle. So if you lose sleep, you might lose the piece where you need to regenerate this prefrontal cortex, and that can have everything to do with making decisions, remembering information, and so on. Another thing is that sleep-deprived individuals are often very irritable. So if on any given day you wake up and you're just really irritated, you probably didn't get enough sleep. And these individuals in large sample studies are more likely to be angry. They're more likely to blame other people for stuff that happens to them, whether it's the other person's choice or not. And they're more likely to plan revenge. That's, I think, what happens when kids get in gangs. And they lose sleep and they're running like this pack mentality. And they plan revenge on somebody that they think they don't like for whatever reason. And it can be really dangerous. I was listening to a couple talk the other day, and it was very funny. Because he obviously was sleep deprived, because let me tell you, he was very irritable. Everything was rubbing him the wrong way. And something happened, I don't remember what it was, and he looked at somebody in the family, he says, that's your fault. You know, when we blame somebody, what we're trying to do is displace on another brain some of the discomfort we're feeling. So he says, that's your fault. And the family member looked at him and he said, I wasn't even there. I didn't have anything to do with this. And the person said, I know, but I'm blaming you anyway. And that's about how functional it is when your brain is sleep deprived. Let's talk a little bit about intelligence quotient.